I'm so excited you want to learn how to make an apple pie. There are 4 ingredients for the crust: flour, salt, Crisco, and ice water. I keep my shortening in the fridge because cold is better for pie crust. And this is what you need for the filling. I used about 3/4 of a cup of sugar, but you can use a cup or more, maybe a tablespoon of cinnamon, and about a 1/4 teaspoon each of nutmeg and cloves, but all of this is a matter of taste, so there are no measurements listed. Here are the baking times for you. It helps to have all of your ingredients ready to go before you begin. We're going to start with a crust. Measure about 3 cups of flour into your sifter. You will also need a cup of shortening, 2 teaspoons of salt, and ice water. After sifting the flour once, measure the 2½ cups you will need for the crust back into the sifter. I set aside some of the extra flour for later when I roll out the second crust. Sift the flour again, this time with the salt added. Add in the shortening. You can buy Crisco in a block like butter now, which is a little easier to work with. Then with a pastry cutter, work the dough until you have pea-sized pieces and the shortening is evenly cut through. I added 3 tablespoons of water to start, but needed to add just a little bit more. The amount of water depends on the humidity and can vary. Don't add too much. Also, you don't want to overwork the dough at this point or your crust will be tough. You want the dough to just barely stick together as you gather it up to make a ball. Since you're making 2 crusts, cut the ball in half and set 1/2 aside. With floured hands, gently press the dough into a flattened ball. Make sure there is flour under the dough. Roll out a bit and flip it over. Roll it out halfway and then use a metal spatula to loosen it from the board. Add more flour on top, flip it over, add more flour again, and continue rolling until it will fit your pie pan with extra over the edges. For me, that's about 14 inches in diameter. Run a spatula under it again to loosen it, and then load it onto your rolling pin. Carefully roll it onto your pie plate. Scooch it into the pan and gently press it against the bottom and sides of the pie pan. From the time you add the water, you want to be very gentle and don't overwork the dough. Set the crust aside. Now we're going to get the apples ready. Larger apples are easier to work with, but the ones I'm using are medium-sized. Fill a sink or tub with water and peel your apples. Drop them in the water after peeling so they don't turn brown. Next, core the apples. You can do this either with a knife or with an apple corer if you have one. The corer is faster, but I like cutting with a knife so I can control the size of the apple pieces. Once you've finished coring all of the apples, you're going to drain them in a colander. Place a wet towel over them again to keep them from turning brown. Now we'll get the top crust ready. Repeat the steps for rolling out the crust. Shape the dough into a flattened ball, roll it out halfway, and flip it. Use plenty of flour so it doesn't stick or tear. Roll it the rest of the way and load it onto your rolling pin. Set that aside. Now with a paring knife, slice each apple into a bowl. I usually cut 4 or 5 times per piece. The pie will cook more evenly if the pieces are all the same size. I recommend you don't cut your pieces too small or it will bake down too quickly and you won't have chunks of apple in your finished pie. Put about half of the apples into the bottom crust. Pour a scoop of sugar on it and dot with butter. My sugar scoop holds about 1/4 cup of sugar. Finish filling the pie. Pile the apples until you can't get any more in. If you have any leftovers, you can use them to make applesauce. Add more sugar. I put 2 more scoops. The amount depends on how sweet your apples are, how many apples you used, and how sweet you like your pie. These apples were very sweet, so I didn't use a lot of sugar. Shake on cinnamon. I added a bit of ground nutmeg and cloves. I pour a little bit in my palm and rub my hands together to dust them over the pie. The spices are totally up to you and your taste. If you don't like the spice, don't use it. If you want more, put more. You can sift on a tablespoon or 2 of flour if you want your filling less juicy. Dot with a pat of butter. Carefully roll the top crust onto the pie. Fold the crust edges together onto the lip of the pie pan. Again, you do not want to overpress or overwork the dough. Gently pinch the dough together to create a fluted edge and seal the pie. This is where it's better to be gentle and a little haphazard so your crust is flaky, rather than to pinch to perfect looking points and have a tough crust. Poke the top of the crust all over with a fork. Put your pie in the oven at 425 for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, you will turn the heat down to 350 and continue baking for another 35 to 45 minutes. Keep an eye on it so it doesn't overbrown. Once the pie is in the oven, I make a foil collar to put over the edge of the pie for the last 10 or 20 minutes of baking if needed. It keeps the edges from browning too much. If the top of the pie is getting too dark, you can add a sheet of foil over the whole pie as it finishes cooking. Check to see if it is done by sticking a fork into one or more of the fork holes. The apples should be soft. Cool on a wire rack until you can't stand it anymore and you just have to have a piece. I serve with ice cream, which will compensate if by chance your pie is not quite as sweet as you like. Enjoy, and thank you for watching.